welcome to another episode of Steele Creek Explore. I'm your host, Jeremy Stout. A few weeks ago, I was talking to my friend Dom, who's very interested in trees, and he suggested that he might like to see a whole episode on trees of Steele Creek Park and our region. So Dom, that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we can talk about trees, we have to learn what a tree is. That sounds like a pretty easy task, but most of us know how to identify a tree when we see one. Maybe not its species, but we can at least see a tree and say, yes, that is a tree. But how do you actually define what a tree is? That's when it gets a little bit more tricky. There are some facts that most trees share in common. Most of them have what we call wood or woody tissue inside their trunk or around just inside the bark. Most trees emanate from a single stem. They have just one trunk that comes up from the base, although sometimes they can be more shrub-like in what's called their habit or how a tree grows. But the truth is, the word tree has no biological significance. What do I mean by biological significance? If we talk about a group of vertebrate animals, say mammals, okay? Whether we're talking about monkeys or shrews or dogs or any other furry animal, all those things are more closely related to each other than they are to, say, a turtle or a bird. Well, with trees, that's not always the case. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take a look at this shot right here. You see an area in the park with several different kinds of trees, and you also see grass and other plants growing around the base. Well, we introduced you last time when we talked about wildflowers to a group of plants called the angiosperms, the flowering plants. So let's take a look at this tree right here. This is an angiosperm. This grass that grows around its base is also an angiosperm plant. It's a flowering plant. This white pine tree is a gymnosperm. It's in a totally different group of plants. So what we're saying here is that as far as close relationships biologically, taxonomically, this tree is closer related to the grass growing at its base than it is to this other tree, the pine tree. So that's what I mean by the word tree not meaning anything in biology, in a biological sense. But of course, it means something to us. We know what a tree is, and we know that they form some of the dominant habitats of our area here in the southern Appalachians. There are different trees, different places you go, and they are fun to identify and learn about. Like this beautiful eastern hemlock that's here behind me. This is one of the oldest trees in Steele Creek Park, probably over 450 years old, but even it isn't the oldest. So let's take a look at some of the trees and the habitats that they create here in the park. Well, this is a very special habitat here in Steele Creek Park. This is Hemlock Hollow, for which the Hemlock Hollow Trail gets its name. And as you can imagine, this is a habitat that's especially characterized by one type of tree, and that's the eastern hemlock. This is a tree that forms large stands, oftentimes along water's edges. This is an important habitat for many different plants and animals. Of course, these being cone-bearing trees, these are evergreen, so this habitat stays shady all year round. This provides wonderful cover for the water. It helps keep water cool, especially along mountain streams where you find this habitat. But unfortunately, this is also a habitat that is under a very serious threat. The hemlock woolly adelgid is a little insect that's stowed away on some nursery plants. It's a native of Asia and came here to North America probably in the 1920s. And this insect is causing rampant destruction of our hemlock forests throughout the eastern United States. There's no native or natural cure for the hemlock woolly adelgid because all of our trees here have adapted to life without this pest. And unfortunately, these are causing extreme destruction throughout this ecosystem all along the east. And there's more that we stand to lose than just the hemlock trees. This is a habitat that is required by several species of salamander. Birds use this habitat for nesting. It's very unfortunate what's taking place right now before our eyes. Luckily, here in Steele Creek Park, we have taken measures to protect our hemlocks from further destruction by this nefarious insect. Well, while many trees can be identified by their trunks and their bark and things that are close to the ground, oftentimes when we're leading hikes for public visitors or if we're doing a show like this, it's best to show leaves of a tree from very small specimens. Obviously, this red maple here will get much larger when it's fully mature. But at this size, all the canopy leaves are really close to the ground, and so it lends itself very well to being shown and understood and talked about. So this right here is a classic maple leaf. While there are many different species of maple that occur in our area, the red maple is a common one that you'll find here in Steele Creek Park's woods. Let's see what else we can find. Well, this is a tree that is oftentimes very large in our area, and it is one of the trees that you can identify by its bark. This is the classic habit of the American sycamore. It has what's called exfoliating bark, which is bark that is oftentimes fully intact right at the base, and as you go upward towards the top of the tree, the bark is actually sloughing off, and it leaves this very noticeable pattern that oftentimes looks sort of like camouflage. And a lot of folks even call this the camo tree. This is not a disease and this is not a problem. This is a very normal and healthy American sycamore. Its leaves are somewhat maple shaped, but are much larger, and oftentimes people who think they have world record maple leaves actually have standard sized sycamore leaves. Well, one of our most common trees in the southern Appalachians, and definitely one of the most spectacular at maturity, is what most folks know as the tulip poplar, although its official name is the tulip tree. But that's not to be confused with a popular ornamental shrub that people plant that are sometimes called tulip trees. I usually use the term tulip poplar, even though it's hard to find it in the field guides under that name. This is a tree that actually gets its name from the flowers that it produces in the late spring every year, but it's also easy to tell from the leaves. This unique shaped leaf sort of resembles the silhouette of a flower or a tulip. It's the only tree in eastern North America with leaves that look like this. At maturity, these trees can rival some of the redwoods of the Pacific Northwest and can actually be close to 300 feet tall. Well, now we'll take you out of some of these remote areas of the park and take you into Steele Creek Park's own Arboretum, a great place to learn about and identify native trees. If you didn't know, an arboretum is like a museum of trees. But unlike most museums where things tend to be dead when you go there, an arboretum is a living museum where the trees are alive and thriving. And here in Steele Creek Park, our arboretum was certified as such by the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council in 2008, and it was funded by a grant from the Friends of Steele Creek Nature Center and Park. In our arboretum, we have over 30 species of native trees along a very comfortable walking trail. All of these trees are labeled with interpretive signs that not just tell you the common and the scientific name of the species, but also gives you some interesting information about each of these species. Like you could find the American holly, which even though it's a broadleaf angiosperm tree, this is an evergreen. It keeps its leaves all year long. You can find some beautiful specimens of green ash. Here in the Arboretum, we have a large specimen growing right at the water's edge. You can also find flowering species at the right time of year, flowering dogwood and redbud, which we showed you in a previous episode. These and many others can be found in our park Arboretum. Well, we've shown you a handful of the species of tree that we have right here in Steele Creek Park, but of course you don't have to come all the way to a park or natural area to investigate some of the native trees and shrubs of our region. You can find well over 100 species just here in the southern Appalachians alone, and you can find those in your neighborhood and even in your own yard. If you're interested in planting trees, I highly recommend picking up the City of Bristol, Tennessee, Parks and Rec, and the Tree City USA Board's Trees for Bristol brochure. This gives a whole host of information about what trees to put where, how to plant, and how to maintain your investment for years to come. But in the meantime, don't forget to explore the trees in your home and garden and here in the park where you can be the explorer.